So we were going to talk about the tiara.
Will we?
Yeah.
I thought I'd said no.
I know, but I just think it would look so fabulous if you
Yeah, but
did.
I've only got little tiny tiaras. They're not really worth it.
The order did not arrive as a suggestion, a private request, or another carefully worded palace compromise. It came directly from King Charles, carrying the authority of the crown and the finality of a door being locked. Camilla's personal royal tiara collection was to be removed from her control and transferred to Princess Anne. By the time the Queen understood what had happened, the decision had already become irreversible. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles signed the instruction. The royal order, a command issued under the sovereign's authority, required every tiara in Camilla's custody to be catalogued, sealed, and moved into Anne's oversight. These were not ornaments. They had appeared at state banquets, diplomatic receptions, and ceremonies, each tied to the Queen's acceptance and place beside the monarch. Removing them meant separating her identity from the symbols she believed proved she belonged. Anne entered the king's study expecting a briefing. Instead, Charles placed the sealed document before her and explained that she would protect the collection, approve selections, and authorize ceremonial use. The Princess Royal, the title given to the monarch's senior daughter, did not reach for the folder. She watched her brother's face, then asked whether Camilla had been told. When he admitted she was receiving the news at that moment, Anne's expression tightened. She closed the file, understanding that duty had placed her inside a marriage she had never intended to judge. Camilla stood before a mirror, while her dresser fastened a bracelet. The message arrived. She read it once, then again, and the woman beside her stopped moving, as the Queen's face changed from disbelief to controlled humiliation. Camilla asked one question: when would the cases be taken? The answer came, but struck hard, immediately. Charles remained alone after the document left his desk. He stared at the empty space where his signature had rested, knowing he had wounded his wife to defend what belonged not to any individual, but to the crown. Yet the harshest detail lay in the order. Camilla could not reclaim the tiaras through household staff, private arrangements, or later ceremonial changes. The door had been closed from every side. Anne felt no victory. Camilla felt no mercy. Charles felt no relief. Beneath the silence waited the question none could escape. What had happened behind palace doors to drive the king this far? To understand why Charles was willing to place his marriage under such strain, the people at the center of the order, and everything each of them stood to lose, must first be understood. For Charles, the tiaras represented duty. For Camilla, they represented acceptance after decades of judgment. For Anne, they represented something far more uncomfortable: responsibility without desire. The transfer placed three members of the royal family inside the same emotional trap. One had issued the order, one had been stripped of control, and one had inherited a burden capable of damaging both her brother's marriage and her own place within the crown. Charles had never viewed royal jewels as private rewards. To him, every piece belonged to a larger story of continuity, dignity, and service. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an enduring institution rather than one individual, demanded that its symbols be protected from personal desire. Yet Camilla saw the collection differently. Each tiara marked a battle survived, a banquet endured, and a moment when the woman once judged from every side had finally stood beside the sovereign without apology. Losing control of those jewels did not feel administrative. It felt like acceptance being withdrawn. Anne understood the danger immediately. She had built her life around discipline, restraint, and duty, but there was no victory in receiving the collection. The Princess Royal, the traditional title held by the monarch's eldest daughter, knew the transfer would be seen as a judgment against Camilla, whether she wanted that role or not. Charles had chosen his sister because she had previously challenged the careless handling of royal jewelry and demanded tighter records. That decision now placed her directly between husband and wife. Camilla refused help in the private sitting room. She lifted the tiara chosen for an upcoming banquet, held it for several seconds, and lowered it into its case herself. Her dresser stepped forward, but the queen raised one hand. Her fingers trembled as she closed the lid. She had already begun to believe Anne had encouraged the order, even though the king's sister had known nothing until she entered his study. Anne stood before the locked cabinet containing the first delivered cases. She touched none of them. Instead, she asked the equerry, an officer who assists senior royals with official duties, to leave the room. When the door closed, she stared at the cabinet and questioned what Charles had truly made her. A guardian would protect the jewels. An executioner would protect the order while destroying the person wounded by it. Charles knew the same truth. He had trusted Anne because she would never confuse access with ownership. But that trust had created a new fracture. Camilla now saw betrayal where her sister-in-law saw obligation. Anne saw pain where the king had insisted on principle. And beneath all three emotions waited one memory Camilla could not silence. A confrontation during a royal ceremony when Charles first began to doubt whether she should remain in control. The order may have been signed in silence, but its true beginning lay in one ceremony where a private disagreement became impossible for the king to ignore. Every palace crisis has a moment that appears insignificant until history turns back and recognizes it as the fracture point. For this decision, that moment came during a private rehearsal for a Commonwealth reception. No cameras captured it. No official record described it. Yet one disputed tiara, one sharp exchange, and one refusal to yield convinced Charles that the collection could no longer remain where it was. Weeks earlier, Buckingham Palace had been preparing for the Commonwealth reception, a formal gathering where the monarch welcomes representatives from nations linked through the Commonwealth. Jewelry choices for such occasions were never random. Each piece carried history, rank, and a message about who stood at the center of the monarchy's future. One historically important tiara had already been reserved for Catherine, while Camilla had been offered another piece, judged more suitable for the evening. Camilla rejected the selection. During the final rehearsal, she ordered an aide to bring the tiara set aside for Catherine and insisted that, as queen, she had the authority to wear it whenever she wished. The room tightened. Charles tried to slow the exchange, but the tension had already crossed a line. When the aide hesitated, the queen repeated the instruction, this time with enough force to make clear that she expected obedience. Anne entered before the case could be moved. She listened, then told Camilla in a calm voice that the jewels existed to serve continuity and could not be reassigned according to personal preference. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, did not raise her voice. That restraint only made the rebuke cut deeper. Camilla turned on her. She accused Anne of treating her like a temporary occupant rather than the king's wife. Charles stepped between them and urged both women to stop. But his expression changed when the queen declared that no household rule could limit what belonged to her. That sentence landed harder than the argument itself. Anne remained after Camilla left. Charles lifted the disputed tiara's case and closed it personally. Then he said the crown could not survive if stewardship, meaning the duty to protect something for future generations, was confused with ownership. His sister said nothing, but she understood that the dispute had become more than personal. Charles acted that night. He requested a complete inventory of every tiara under Camilla's control, reviewed the movement records, and wrote one word across the top of the file: review. Then he locked it inside his desk. Camilla would later discover that Anne had witnessed the exact moment her husband's doubt became action. And once she understood that, suspicion hardened into fury. What began as a dispute over one tiara was about to become a face-to-face reckoning over respect, legitimacy, and who truly held power beside the throne. Camilla did not send an aide, request mediation, or wait for Charles to explain himself. She went directly to Anne. The meeting took place behind a closed door, with no secretaries, no equerries, and no witnesses to soften what followed. One woman believed she had been deliberately stripped of dignity. The other believed she had been handed an order she could neither celebrate nor refuse. Neither was prepared to retreat. Camilla chose a small private drawing room because formality would only give Anne somewhere to hide. The space was too intimate for ceremony and too quiet for careful performance. An equerry, meaning a royal officer who assists senior family members with official duties, waited outside before being dismissed. Anne arrived carrying the signed transfer order, but she left it closed on the table. That gesture mattered. She had come as Charles' sister, not merely as the new custodian of the collection. Camilla spoke first. She accused Anne of waiting years for the chance to undermine her, and said the transfer had reduced her from queen to guest. Every future banquet, reception, and state occasion would now force her to ask permission before wearing symbols tied to her own rank. The queen consort had fought for acceptance for decades. Now, in one command, that acceptance felt conditional again. Anne did not flinch. She said she had never asked for the collection and had taken no pleasure in receiving it. Yet she would not apologize for defending boundaries Camilla had crossed during the Commonwealth rehearsal. The Princess Royal reminded her that royal jewels were held in trust for the institution, not claimed through marriage, title, or wounded pride. Camilla pushed her chair backward. She demanded that Anne refuse the order and return the cases before the damage became permanent. The king's sister remained standing, placed both hands on the table, and answered with brutal clarity. Refusing Charles would not restore Camilla's control. It would only leave the tiaras exposed to another struggle. Anne then revealed what the Royal Review had uncovered through a documented inventory report. 2 pieces had nearly been moved between royal residences without complete authorization. Camilla insisted she knew nothing about those arrangements, but her anger faltered when Anne named the senior aide who had approved them in the Queen's name. Camilla went still. For the first time, humiliation gave way to uncertainty. She had entered the room believing Anne was the architect of her downfall. Now she faced the possibility that someone within her own household had acted beyond her knowledge. Anne allowed the silence to settle before delivering the final warning. Charles had not acted because of one argument alone. He possessed a document that had turned suspicion into certainty. The confrontation exposed the wound, but the document waiting inside Charles's private file would reveal why royal authority had moved so decisively against Camilla. The most damaging object in the palace was not a crown, a tiara, or a sealed jewelry case. It was a thin file resting on Charles's desk. Inside were dates, signatures, authorization gaps, and one instruction issued in Camilla's name. The king had spent years defending the woman he loved against public judgment. Now he faced evidence suggesting that affection and duty had reached a line neither could cross without consequence. Charles opened the file alone late that evening. The royal collection operated through strict rules of custody, conservation, transport, and ceremonial authorization, meaning every important piece had to be tracked, protected, and approved whenever it moved. Those rules mattered because the jewels did not belong to one marriage or one reign. They were held for the monarchy's future. As sovereign, he possessed final authority over that system, but using it against his own wife would carry a cost no legal power could soften. The king reached the page that changed everything. An aide had authorized movement of a tiara in Camilla's name, yet the request contained gaps no senior official could explain. He removed his glasses and sat motionless. One piece had been scheduled for transfer to a private residence before a senior curator stopped it and demanded written authority. The curator, an expert responsible for protecting and recording the royal collection, had refused to release the case until the paperwork matched the instruction. It never did. Charles could not prove Camilla had personally ordered the move. That uncertainty made the decision more painful, not less. If he acted, he would humiliate the woman he had defended for years. If he did nothing, he would show the palace that loyalty could excuse the same failures he would condemn in anyone else. The problem was no longer one tiara. Competing orders now surrounded the Queen's household, and the system had become unsafe. William entered later for a private meeting. He chose every word carefully, warning his father that unexplained movement of royal jewelry could eventually destroy public trust. The prince understood that one missing signature might look small inside the palace, but outside, it would become proof that privilege had outrun responsibility. Charles listened without interruption. He knew the future king was not attacking Camilla. He was protecting the institution both men would one day be judged for. Charles finally signed the transfer order. He set down the pen, kept his eyes on the desk, and instructed his private secretary to inform Anne before anyone else. His voice remained steady as the document was removed, but the silence after it left revealed the truth. The king had chosen duty, and he already knew who would suffer first. The king had made his decision in private, but the removal of the first locked case would turn that decision into a reality no one in Camilla's household could deny. The transfer became real not when Charles signed the order, but when the first case was lifted from Camilla's dressing room. There was no public announcement, no ceremonial handover, and no argument in the corridor. Only gloved hands, inventory sheets, and the sound of locks closing. Camilla watched the objects that had symbolized her acceptance disappear one by one, knowing the palace would continue functioning as though nothing had changed. Camilla stood beside the dressing table as a small team of royal collection officers entered. Their task was precise: catalog every tiara, confirm its condition, seal each case, and record the transfer into Anne's custody. Royal collection officers are specialists responsible for protecting, documenting, and moving historic objects belonging to the monarchy. Their calm procedure made the moment worse. To them, it was a controlled handover. To the Queen, it was the dismantling of authority she had fought years to earn. The officer reached the tiara from the Commonwealth dispute. Camilla did not touch it. When he asked her to confirm the inventory number, she answered without looking at the case. Around her, members of the household kept their eyes lowered. No one knew whether they were witnessing a temporary adjustment or the permanent shrinking of her influence. Then the new instruction arrived. Every future request for ceremonial jewelry would pass through an approval channel supervised by Anne. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the sovereign's eldest daughter, would now decide what could be worn and when. Camilla felt the humiliation deepen. One sealed case contained a handwritten note asking that a tiara be reserved for an unapproved private occasion. The note had come from her jewelry office. Before she could demand an explanation, the senior aide named by Anne abruptly offered to resign. That resignation changed everything. The Queen began to suspect that someone inside her own household had made decisions in her name and hidden them until the damage became irreversible. Charles arrived after the officers had gone. Camilla asked whether he had considered what the transfer would mean to her personally. The king did not defend himself with procedure. He told her he had considered it every moment before signing. She heard pain in his answer, but not regret, and that distinction cut deeper than anger. Camilla waited until he left. She closed the dressing room door, sat before the empty cabinet, and removed the key from her ring. For years, that key had represented access, rank, and belonging. Now it opened nothing. She placed it on the table and did not reach for it again. Yet the silence left behind was not empty. It created room for a harder truth. Charles had acted in the name of justice. Anne had accepted the burden in the name of duty. But both now had to face whether duty without mercy had become another form of cruelty. With the jewels gone and the anger exhausted, the crisis reached the moment when titles and procedures could no longer speak for the people carrying its deepest wounds. For the first time since the order was signed, Charles and Anne met without files, advisors, or royal staff in the room. There was no formal agenda. No jewelry cases waited between them. They spoke not as sovereign and custodian, but as brother and sister. What Anne said in that private moment did not reverse the decision. It changed something more important: the spirit in which the consequences would now be carried. Anne had requested the meeting after witnessing the damage spreading through Camilla's household. Staff members were afraid to speak. The Queen had withdrawn behind closed doors, and every silence seemed to carry blame. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, understood why the transfer had been necessary. Yet she also understood how quickly protection could begin to resemble punishment when no mercy was shown. Charles remained firm. He believed the order had preserved the collection from confusion, competing instructions, and further risk. Still, the king could no longer ignore what the execution of that order had done. Camilla had not simply lost access to jewelry, she had been made to feel that the monarchy had withdrawn its trust in full view of her own household. Anne leaned forward and told her brother that duty without mercy became vanity. Charles looked away. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he admitted that he had signed as sovereign because he feared he would weaken if he acted only as a husband. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, the person carrying final constitutional and ceremonial authority. But in that room, authority offered him no protection from guilt. Anne confessed that she had never wanted the collection. Accepting it had made Camilla see her as a rival, even though she had intended only to defend standards. Charles acknowledged that he had allowed his sister to absorb anger that belonged to him. He apologized for placing her between his marriage and the crown, without preparing her for the personal cost. Anne offered a way forward. The tiaras would remain under her custody, but Camilla would keep a defined ceremonial role in selecting pieces for suitable state occasions. Charles agreed to amend the operating rules, not the transfer itself. The compromise protected accountability while refusing to erase the Queen completely. Charles then reached across the table and took back the old dressing room key Anne had received with the collection. He said it should be returned to Camilla. It would no longer open the cabinet, but it would carry another meaning. She had not been expelled from the family. Anne understood the gesture. Charles understood its limits. Mercy had entered the decision, but the order still stood. The family had found a fragile measure of mercy, but outside the palace gates, the story was about to be transformed into a national judgment. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained by palace walls. Britain woke to a royal rupture presented in enormous black letters, urgent broadcasts, and crowds gathering where history and spectacle always collide. To the public, it was a struggle over jewels and status. To Charles, Camilla, and Anne, it was the exposure of a private wound they had only just begun to understand. Palace staff had noticed the change first. New approval forms appeared inside the jewelry authorization system, and Anne's name suddenly stood where Camilla's household had once held control. The system, meaning the formal process used to approve, record, and protect royal jewels, mattered because every signature showed where authority now rested. Quiet conversations became whispers. Whispers reached the press, and Buckingham Palace was forced to respond before the story grew beyond control. The palace issued a restrained statement, calling the transfer a custodial reorganization designed to preserve the collection for future generations. Custodial responsibility means the duty to protect and manage royal property without personally owning it. The explanation sounded calm. The newspapers did not. One national front page showed Camilla at a former state banquet beneath the words, "The Queen's tiaras taken away." Beside it, a smaller photograph of Anne carried another caption, "The New Guardian." Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. One woman raised a handwritten sign declaring, "The crown is not personal property," while another shouted that Camilla had been publicly humiliated. The Queen watched a broadcaster describe the transfer as a royal demotion. She switched off the television before the discussion ended and told her aide that strangers were now debating the most painful moment of her marriage, as though it were entertainment. Anne faced the same storm during a royal engagement. Reporters shouted questions about victory, punishment, and whether Camilla had lost the king's trust. The Princess Royal refused to attack her sister-in-law. She said only that every royal object must be protected with care, dignity, and fairness. Her restraint changed the tone. She could have used the moment to defend herself. Instead, she protected the woman who believed she had helped bring about the crisis. Charles then authorized the palace to confirm that Camilla would continue participating in ceremonial jewelry selections. The announcement quietly exposed the compromise reached in private. The transfer remained final, but the Queen had not been erased. Camilla paused beside a radio that evening, as Anne's words were replayed. She listened in silence. For the first time, she understood that the king's sister had not treated the crisis as a victory. Losing possession did not have to mean losing her place, but accepting that truth would demand one final act of humility. When the noise outside finally faded, One final meeting would determine whether the tiaras remained symbols of betrayal or became proof that the monarchy could place duty above pride without abandoning compassion. The final resolution did not come through another order. It came when Camilla entered a room where Anne was waiting beside the sealed collection. Charles stood between them, not as a ruler delivering punishment, but as a husband and brother prepared to accept the damage his decision had caused. The tiaras would not return to Camilla's custody, yet what happened next proved that surrendering control did not have to mean surrendering dignity. Charles had arranged the meeting to end the personal hostility and formalize the permanent custodial system. That system meant Anne would keep legal and practical oversight of the collection, while Camilla could recommend ceremonial selections under conservation rules and written approval. Those rules mattered, because the jewels belonged to the monarchy across generations, not to one person's rank, marriage, or private sense of belonging. Charles spoke first. He told Camilla the order had never been intended to erase her position or deny what she had endured to stand beside him. The king accepted responsibility for allowing the decision to reach her without compassion. He had acted to protect royal property, but he had failed to protect his wife from the cruelty of how that protection was carried out. Camilla answered without anger. She admitted that access to the tiaras had become proof that she belonged, and losing control had felt like being told the monarchy had never truly accepted her. The queen consort understood now that she had confused possession with legitimacy. Yet saying it aloud still cost her, because the truth touched the oldest wound she carried. Anne opened one sealed case and placed the disputed Commonwealth tiara on the table. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, did not claim it as a prize. She slid the selection record toward Camilla and asked which future occasion would best honor its history. The gesture ended the rivalry more powerfully than any apology could. Camilla did not ask for the collection back. She recommended that the tiara be reserved for Catherine at a future Commonwealth occasion. In that choice, she accepted that continuity sometimes meant yielding to those who would carry the crown forward. Anne then returned the old cabinet key. It no longer opened the collection, but when Camilla closed her hand around it, she understood that trust was being rebuilt. Charles emerged more isolated, but more clearly defined. Anne became guardian without becoming victor. Camilla lost exclusive control, yet gained a more honest place based on service rather than possession. Before leaving, Camilla closed the tiara case herself and passed it to Anne. Charles watched in silence. The family had not escaped unharmed, but resentment had not won. And so the king's order remained final. The tiaras passed into Anne's guardianship. Camilla released her claim to control, and the crown emerged not untouched, but steadier, because duty had finally been separated from possession. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.